Hello, my name is Mohammed Radwan. I am a Visual Studio LM MVP and Senior LM Consultant at Mobile LM.
I will start to continue what we start in the previous period, which is the series of what's new in Visual Studio and TFS or Team Foundation Server 2012. Today I will talk about SSDT or SQL Server Development Tool, the replacement tool for the Visual Studio database project that we used to work with in the previous version of Visual Studio. This new tool will bring extra features and a lot of enhancement over the old one, as we will see through our video today. The first section of this video I will describe the SQL Server Express local DB because it is part of the SSDT, and the second section I will describe the SSDT or SQL Server Development Tool in details after we make sense about SQL Server Express local DB. So let's go to the machine that we can see. Okay, SQL Server Local DB. This is a new version of the SQL Server Express as we used to work in the previous version. What is the difference between SQL Server Express and SQL Server Local DB? SQL Server Local DB, it is an execution mode of the SQL Server Express. So it is not a service anymore. So you will have all the capabilities of the SQL Server Express without need to maintain a services or a separate instance of the SQL Server. And this is very important. So you need a SQL Server so you can write code, debug code, of the T-SQL and write statements and so on and so forth without needing to maintain the SQL Server instance. And this is what the SQL Server Express Local DB bring to us over the old version of the SQL Server Express. So to connect to the SQL Server Express Local DB, we can open the Management Studio. This is the Management Studio of 2008 R2, but we can connect to SQL Server Express local database or local DB version 2012 or version 11, as we can see now. DB 11.0 connect. So now we connected to the SQL Server Express local DB. The first thing that we noticed that we don't have the green arrow which indicate it is not a service anymore. And if we run, it is a process. Let's see here that we have SQL Server run process as mRadwan. And if I refresh here, we find it refresh very fast. But if I close this process, it's not exist anymore. If I refresh, just notice how it takes time to reconnect to the SQL, and it will bring back to again the process. So it become an execution mode, not a service anymore. This is the SQL Server Express Local DB. We can also connect it to the SQL Server Local DB or SQL Server Express Local DB using the Visual Studio. If we open the Visual Studio and just open SQL Server Object Explorer, add SQL Server. I will start, as we can see here, this is SQL Server 2012, not the Management Studio of 28 R2 local DB. So as we can see here, now we connected to the local DB, and we can see here that the same. I can end the process now. Let's close this, and if I just refresh, now the process will come again. So it's execution of the SQL Server Express. So this is a little introduction about SQL Server Express Local DB. It is This is the main difference of the previous version, because it is run as a process. The credential that running the process is the credential that running the application itself. This will give an isolation mode for different developers and many other features. SQL Server Express local DB can be founded as a separate installer application, can be downloaded from Microsoft Download Center if you want. Okay, let's go to the second section of our video today, which is the SSDT or SQL Server Development Tool. Okay, I will create a new SQL Server Development Tool project so we can explain everything. Other language, SQL Server Database Project, SSDT. Okay, this be database 1. This is a new version of Visual Studio Database Project, is the SQL Server Development Tool or SQL Server Development Project. Let's explore the path and see what there. We can see here that there is a folder called Sandbox. Here we can find the database file and the LDF and the MD file, which is the database and the log file, and and so on and so forth. So it there, so you can run. So the database file and the log file can be attached at the runtime to the SQL Server Express local DB, so you can run any stored procedures or statements that you want to programmatically run against your database. So this is how the benefit of the SQL Server Express local database using the SQL Server Development Tool. We will see this in this video. Okay. So let's start by creating a new table. I will call this employees. The first thing here that we will see is that we have the designer section. As we can see here, the designer is split two sections. This is for the code, and this is for the preview of the design, and it is synced together, because if we here changing this is a customer or emp, we can see here that it reflecting directly, and if we get this back, we can see here it a change. So using, let's add some name. Okay, I will save the employee table. So now I have employee tables. Okay, I can also create a stored procedure. To select all the employees. I didn't need params. Select asterisk from employees. And I can save. To run these stored procedures, it will run, as we said, against the local DB or the SQL Server Express local DB. And to configure this, we using the property of the SSDT using the debug. So by using the debug, we tell here that we want to run, when we debug the SQL Server Development Tool, we want to debug against the SQL Server Express local DB. So we will start here modifying the connection string to doing that. By default, it making so. If we just click here and execute, this will run the debug, as we can see, and now it's executed successfully without an error. This because it run against the SQL Server Express local DB, as we mentioned before. Okay. So now try to execute again. it will give me an error because it finds the stored procedure existing already in the database. Where is this stored procedure in the database? Actually, it is here in this database. And if we want to examine this database, we can connect to this database exactly to examine the file. We can connect here using Server Explorer view. We can add a connection. Actually, it will not connect because the Visual Studio is catching the process of the file using the SQL Server Express local DB. So I just want to show it will not connect. So just if I browse here, of course it will not connect because it is catched by another process. So all we will gonna do is to release this process. So now we can connect to this database and examine the stored procedures if we want. It will recreating a process the same, but this time from here. So here there is no table because I am not executing this yet. But if we examine the stored procedure, we will find the stored procedures that we created. Well, let's close this. This is how we can debug using the SQL Server Express local DB. Of course, we can't work here also. If we try to execute this, it will give an error because we already opened this database. So we need to disconnect from the database so we can close the connection and starting here. So now it's connected. Now we take a brief description about SQL Server Development Tool and how we debug the SQL Server Development Tool using the SQL Server Express local DB at the runtime. Now we see how we can create an employee table and how the designer is improved. What if I want to publish this database? And it is, as we used to know, it is deployed before. So if we go here, we will find something we called publish. It is in the older version we call deploy. So if we called publish, actually this is my favorite new feature in the SQL Server Development Tool. I can very simple add the connection string to SQL Server Express local DB, but this is actually it does not make sense. So it is better that we deploy or publish this database on a SQL instance instead of publishing it to the SQL Server Express local DB. So because I don't have SQL Server 2012 here, so I need to change my database to be SQL Server 2008 asterisk need save. Okay, let's go to the publish again. So now I can put a connection string to my server. Just click here. Very simple. If I click publish, let's examine the database. Connect to the SQL Server 2008 R2 database. We can see here there is no database 1. Let's refresh the database. Okay, if I click publish here, we can see it will start publishing the database. Now it succeeds. And we click here, we can find refresh and the database is coming, and we have now an employee table, and in the programmatic we can find our stored procedures published to the database. The most important part of the publishing feature is the ability to create multiple profile for the deployment. For example, if we want to make different action depend on the deployment server. For example, if I deploy local, so I will recreate the database. But if I deploy to the team server or the build server, I will just append and not drop the data that exists on the server. So we have different action taken for different profile. If I right click on the database and click publish, the publishing window pop up to request the publishing data, like the target database connection string. This is the database server that I want to publish or deploy this database project to it. It's also in the advanced I can configure many options like drop the database or recreating the database and many other options. So whenever I click publish, it will pop up this window to request the publishing information. I also can save this publishing information as a publish profile, so I can use later with this publish command, or can use with the team build, as we can see later in this video. Let's close this. As we can see, we didn't have any publishing profile adding to the project. It has an extension .publish.xml, so we didn't have any publishing profile. So let's add one. We simply right click on the database and click publish and start populating the publish the connection string. We will choose the database server, okay, and we may go to advanced and start go to change option. As we mentioned, we have a lot of option controlling the deployment and the publishing of the database, like drop the database, block incremental deployment. There is a lot of option, as we can see. And after that I will save profile as, let's see, team build, and save. After I save, I will start adding existing file to the project and adding this profile, which is team build. So now I have a publishing profile which is called team build. I create another profile while I record this video. It is database1.publish.xml. This is another profile. So if I just right click and choose publish, as we can see, we will find that the publishing is populating using the information existing in the profile. It will not asking anymore about the publishing information because it used the publishing file that I choose to publish. I can also right click on the publishing profile that I want and choose to set as a default profile. So this means whenever I right click on the database project and click publish, it will use this profile to populate the publish information. So it will consider this as a default publish profile. If I want to use this profile when I publish this database on the team build server, so how can I use this? To make this, I need to create a team project. I will create a project called Marvel. Okay. So now I will go to the Solution Explorer. I prefer to add new project as an MVC project. I will start adding. Now I have solution with two projects, MVC project and database project, or SQL Server development project. I will add this to source control to the Marvel LM project. And I will check in this code. Now the check-in is complete successfully, so I will go to the home and build and start to create a new build definition. Okay, manual, okay, Marvel, okay, copy the build. To copy the build I need to access the network and drops folder. I will take this folder because it's created. No need for this. And I will go to the advanced, and in the MS build argument I will start to put the argument to choose the publishing profile that I want. Okay, and here I will write team build dot publish publish dot xml. Let's review. Team build dot publish dot xml. Okay, publish is small. I don't think it's case sensitive, but it's preferred to be the same case. Okay, now after I create this, I will try to build this solution using the build server. Double click, the build running now, and we should see the build tasks now. Now the build finished successfully and the database is deployed. Okay, we want to make sure that it's deployed using the team build. So the first thing, I will delete this database. Oh. Let's run this on a different user. Okay, we want to run the build again to make sure the build will deploy the database or the publish the database from the build server to the SQL server. This is the second build running now. We don't have here the database. Now the project successfully. Let's go to see the database, refresh. Now we can see database 1 is deployed and published successfully using the team build server. Okay, the final feature I will describe about the SQL Server development tool is the SQL command variables. Let's go to the Solution Explorer to describe this. If we go to the property of the database, we can have here a SQL command variable. Here we can have any variables and we can put here a value. This is very important when we want to work with variables in the build and in the running the script when we publish. And if I save this variable, it will be on the publishing. So let's close this. So if now I click on publish on any publishing profile, it will request me to enter a value for this variable, because this variable now belongs to the SQL database project. So any publishing profile must provide a value for this variable. Let's give a value for the variable and publishing it. So I will put a 5 and publish. So now I publish the database and give the variable 5, but this variable not saved, of course, in the publishing profile. So if I want to use the team build publishing profile in the build server, I must save the variable value in the publish profile, otherwise the build will fail. So to save this in the publish profile, we will click on the team build publish profile and choose publish and put a value in the variable. Let's say it's 10, and then save the profile as team build2.publish.xml and cancel, and then right click, add existing file, team build2. So now if I click publish, I will see that now the team build publish2 has a value for the x variable, so it will be used when we start. If I build using the build server, I will use this publishing profile. It will populate the x with the 10 using this publishing profile. But remember, if I right click and click publish on the database, it will not give a value, because we making the default profile is the database 1, and database 1 publishing profile doesn't have value for this variable. I can also make load variables, which load the default variable that I set when I create this configuration in the property of the SQL database projects. So now we have finished this part, and I think it has a lot of improvement and a new feature, very powerful for SQL Server development tool.